So our first reading today comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 60, verses 1 through 6. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples, but the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the hip. Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you, and to you the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. And from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi came from the east and came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. May God bless the hearing and the living of this word. And further, from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, Secrets of Heaven, number 2849 and 5605. As the stars of the heavens symbolize abundant, deeper knowledge of goodness and truth, spiritual people are once compared to stars in various places in the Word, and this is because they know about goodness and truth. "And we will rise up and go" means spiritual life entered into by degrees. This is clear from the meaning of rising up as a raising up into higher and more internal things, and therefore to those that constitute spiritual life, and from the meaning of going as living. So, my friends, as you can see, we will not escape Herod this week either. Today, we explore our first glimpse of Herod in the Gospel of Matthew, his interaction with the Magi. Although the Gospel narrative makes it seem like the Magi showed up right away after Jesus was born, it was more likely that several months have passed, at the very least, since Jesus' birth. It would take a fairly long time for a caravan of travelers to make their way from the Far East. Mary and Joseph and the baby would have settled into a routine and a quiet life. But it was not to remain so. We explored last week how Herod is representative of the evil that exists in our world, the type of spirit that would do anything to preserve power, the type of spirit that is afraid of necessary change, the type of spirit that can only see the primacy of the self. And this type of spirit can be found in actions both overt and covert, conscious and unconscious. It can find its way into social systems and structures that we depend upon and value. The resulting slaughter of the innocents that we heard about last week, that sprang forth from Herod's paranoia and selfishness, calls us to examine our own responsibility for the ways in which the vulnerable suffer in our world. Today we hear about the Magi, representing a wholly different kind of spirit. The Magi were from a different nation and a different religion from Jesus. They were most likely devotees of Zoroastrianism, and yet they practiced an openness to learning new things, a willingness to move themselves from one place to another, a readiness to bow down to something greater than themselves. They could worship in a way that Herod never could. We can also see this spirit in our world if we look for it. Movements and institutions that look toward the greater good, that delight in learning from those who are different, and that understand that our futures are bound up in each other's well-being. But of course, this wouldn't be a Swedenborgian sermon if I didn't also point out that Herod and the Magi additionally represent impulses and desires within each human heart. They are not just out there in the world, but in here, within our hearts. They represent the ever-present potential of our freedom, the spectrum of choices that are available to human beings in their everyday. And as we stand here in the baby days of a new year, it is a great time to consider what kind of spirit we wish to cultivate. Because the conflict between Herod and the Magi goes beyond just being a nice story. It tells us the truth about what kind of responses there are to divine love being born in this world. Epiphany used to be one of the 3 main Christian holy days before Christmas rose in popularity. And it was a celebration of the revelation of the incarnation. So not just the fact of Jesus' birth, but the truth of what that birth communicated. The truth that divine love reached out to a beloved world and a beloved people, but that this reaching out was going to change us and by extension change the world we live in. And what is our reaction to this truth? Do we evade, conspire, defend, rage, and destroy like Herod? Or do we rise up? Do we commit to a journey, no matter how long or dangerous? Do we seek with curiosity and humility? Do we bow down and worship? Do we bow down and worship divine love and wisdom in the whole of our life, in every relationship and interaction we will ever have? That's a big question and a lot to ask. But there isn't a corner of our life that will need to journey further than we have ever journeyed that won't be asked to bow lower than we thought was possible. In a sense, Christmas is passive. We often focus on the gift that is given to us. Epiphany is active and focuses on the journey we will make and the gifts we will give to God and others. And so, while we often focus on the gifts that the Magi bring, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, we also can't forget the other gift in the story, the star. In the Swedenborgian worldview, a star represents knowledge learned from heaven and from God, knowledge learned from something beyond us, knowledge that draws us forward and guides us up and out of our own self-obsession and our own sense of rightness and privilege. It is important to remember that the Magi journeyed a long way. They rose up out of their own context and traveled to another, not knowing exactly what they would find, led by a star and by their belief that this star would teach them something. Herod, of course, could not see the star. The Herod spirit refuses to look at anything but the primacy of the self. And such a spirit will never take the risk of journeying, of not knowing the right answer, and of putting aside outward strength and perceived rightness. And so, as we consider what Epiphany calls us to, as we consider how we want to live our lives and how we wish to bow down before the Lord and give of our own resources, spirit, and love, we must remember to be guided by the star, by thoughts of the greater good, and how we are being called to rise up to meet whatever spiritual growth God has in mind for us. Because we remember that the Magi did not give because it served them. The baby Jesus was not going to remember what they gave and why, for we all know babies prefer the boxes that the gifts come in to the gifts themselves. They gave because that was what journeying to the Lord involved. The journey was the gift, and the gold and frankincense and myrrh simply a natural culmination of the journeying. And neither did the Magi give out of their own comfort. They didn't send gifts, they brought them. They journeyed out of their own self-conception to see what divine love had wrought. And then they bowed down to what they found, not to their own idea of what it would be. And we get to choose to enact this later nativity scene each day, even after it comes down from the mantle after Christmas. But rather than a static scene, it is truly a dynamic one. And perhaps this year, in my own home, I will keep the Magi out all year long and have them journey around my living spaces as a reminder that the birth of divine love bids us move, and that the journey itself is a gift. Amen.